Marine Reacts to the Grey Knights, Part 1A, by Luetin09. As always, I'm going to be leaving a link to the original video and channel down in the description below, so go ahead and make sure that you check them out. Now, that Part 1A is essentially just because I know his videos are a bit longer, so I'm going to be cutting them in half. That way, it's not like a 52-minute video, it might be actually like an hour 20 minutes at the end. So to avoid that and keep videos roughly around 30 minutes, I'm gonna go to about 25-minute mark, and then I'll cut it there. And then for the next time, I'll react to the second part, or it would be part 1B of the same video. So that way I can also get it in bits and chunks and try to ingrain it a little more, see if this helps with my memory issues. Also, officially on my spring break, I'm gonna enjoy starting to get to play a lot more games, specifically Space Marine, and also get into like the other games that I've been hearing as well. So I expect more videos to be coming a little more frequently than usual, at least until I start my last term. But before we get into the actual video, don't forget to like, subscribe, it really does help me out a lot. Hit that notification button right there, so you get notified every time I do upload. Sometimes uploading twice a day, typically working on them in the mornings and releasing them in the late afternoon to late evening. That way when y'all get off work, you can enjoy the videos at your leisure. So without further ado, let's go ahead and see what the Grey Knights are all about. The suspense is killing me right now. I'm sorry, that little section right there, it's one of those just little quotes that you really ingrain in your head and just makes you go like, ah. Like in that short animation film, Hell's Reach, when he said, "I am Wrath incarnate," or "the planet broke before the guard." Just these little quotes that really makes you like, get giddy.
Whispers are sometimes heard on Imperial worlds of an Astartes force, rarely spoken of or seen, but to those enemies of the Imperium who know their names, forever they are feared. If standard Imperial Astartes are on many worlds rarely seen, if ever, then the Order of the Grey Knights are comparatively invisible, barely a myth or a legend, likely spoken of as Silver Angels and no more than that. We've seen already some of the darkest entities that exist in the galaxy of the far future, and that humanity is able to wield such forces as the Imperial Astartes, who stand as the last fragmented bastions of defense against the nightmarish terrors that seek to cleanse humanity from the galaxy. Few forces, though, have the pure and distilled ability, as well as the tools required to face the ever more threatening horrors that the Imperium must. Nor do most Imperial forces carry the strength of mind or the willpower to do so. Those who face the worst nightmares of mankind are known simply as the Grey Knights. Their order founded at the end of the heresy to stand as a bulwark against the entities of chaos and the horrors who threaten humanity. Even fewer individuals will qualify to join their honoured ranks than those who seek enrolment to join these standard Space Marines. The Grey Knights are a highly secretive order, yet rightly feared by many as a force with unrivaled powers and unbreakable.
I've been wondering that too. As far as I understand that every chapter has their own recruiting process, but as soon as you get someone, are you attached to that chapter for the rest of your life? Is there a possible reason that you might get switched to another chapter? For example, maybe not the Grey Knights, because I think all of them are supposed to be powerful psychers. And so, for example, if you went from the Ultramarines to the Salamanders, or vice versa, or anyone in general, is it possible something like that would happen? Or is it the chapter you're in, that's the one that you're going to stay with? Or with the Grey Knights, I know they're supposed to be in more special category because of what they're able to do. But if someone did have psyker powers, but they weren't a Grey Knight, would they be able to shift or transition, or I guess you want to say apply for that chapter? It's just something I've been curious about for a short while.
Unbreakable mental will. Unlike the regular Space Marines, if you could ever call them regular, those brought into the honoured ranks of the Grey Knights are implanted with a gene seed directly imbued with the power of the genome from the Emperor himself. Grey Knights exist outside the standard chain of command comparative to the Adeptus Astartes, who follow the subsequent commands of the Adeptus Administratum, the High Lords of Terror, and now the Lord Commander of the Imperium. The Grey Knights are in fact not aligned with the regular military Imperial forces, but are instead a part of the Imperial Inquisition, who, unlike all other forces within the Imperium, answer only to the Emperor himself, and as such operate outside of the ordinary structure of the Imperium of Man. They are a component force of the Ordo Malleus, which is a subset of the Inquisition. The Ordo Malleus is otherwise simply known in layman's terms as the Demon Hunters. There are other similar subdivisions within the Inquisition, such as the Ordo Heretics, the Witch Hunters, and the Ordo Xenos, the fairly self-explanatory Alien Hunters. The Ordo Malleus Inquisitors and the Grey Knights' entire focus is to destroy, purge, and cleanse any physically manifested demons or chaos entities who encroach on the physical materium, as well as to exterminate those individuals who show either a taint or desire to spread the message of chaos and disrupt the peaceful order of the Imperium. The story of the Grey Knights and indeed the Inquisition is more detailed and intricate than you may imagine. Its origins lie at the very core of the consequences displayed for all to see that resulted because of the Horus Heresy. The creation of the Order of the Grey Knights centres around two of the strongest and my own personally favoured figures in the Imperium, who are both not only instrumental in its survival, but who would also show absolute unwavering loyalty to the Emperor, Malcador the Sigillite, and Nathaniel Garrow. The story of this all begins during the early days of the Horus Heresy, where Horus Lupercal, as now the War Master of the Great Crusade, would make his first devastating strikes against humanity, and finally his true loyalties to be shown openly, that he had turned away from the Emperor and the Imperium and sided with the gods of chaos in an attempt to destroy the Emperor and annihilate whatever remained of the shattered Imperium of Man. Already
Real quick, I'm actually listening to the Horus Heresy book right now on Audible, and it's a little tricky in the beginning, but then I started painting the picture, and obviously a little bit of spoiler, but I'm pretty sure you've all read it. I'm up to the part where Lorcan, or Logan, I'm pretty sure it's Lorcan, he's getting interviewed by a remembrance reporter, or essentially a reporter or journalist, and she's asking him about what happened during that whole Horus Heresy thing and all that. And I think it happened just a few months ago and at the part that I'm at, as far as when that happened. And there was something cool in there also that really struck out to me, which was when Lorcan and them got to this room that had a different emperor or someone else who was just like another kingdom or world that they were on, and they went there to conquer it, to unify it, because they had killed someone. I don't remember his name, Janissir or Sir Jameis or something like that. And he ended up, obviously still spoilers, but after they had killed him, they went there to go retaliate. And then right before, I mean, I thought like, hey, they killed him. And it's like, why wouldn't they go attack him? Because it was supposed to be like an ambassador. And then when they went there and got there, the emperor there was saying that what would have happened if they had just left them alone? I mean, granted, I still thought like, well, you killed their guy for no reason. But then it's like, even if he hadn't killed them, they still would have probably came, because they were trying to unify everybody, whether you wanted to or not. I mean, at least that's what I'm getting. So it really struck in my mind, like, what if they did just leave them alone? And I haven't really gotten an answer yet. I don't know if it's going to happen more in the story. But what I remember is that Lorcan just said, you know why. And that was pretty much it. And then I think he got pissed off, kicked her out of there. And now she's coming back to get some more story. But I think I'm going to do a little review on the book as soon as I finish. But enough of me talking. Let's get back to the video.
By this time, some of the Primarchs close to Horus were already aware of the War Master's switch in loyalty and were making their own tentative explorations within their ranks to discover who they could rely upon, who would support their cause when the time came. The ultimate goal, of course, being that the higher-ranking Astartes brothers would be those who the regular ranks would look to see who they were going to take a lead from, and who would have to resultingly crush any loyalist remnant brothers in the legions. Any Astartes officers who were known to be unbreakable or too straight-minded would certainly have to be dealt with before or after the fact. This is when Battle Captain Nathaniel Garrow enters the scene. Now, he was serving as a battle captain within the Death Guard Legion, a Space Marine force who, along with their Primarch Mortarion, would turn traitor to the Imperium and subsequently become the foul and infamous Plague Marines of Nurgle. Garrow, though, would stay as one of the very few in the Death Guard to remain loyal to the Emperor. He would in fact be one of the most staunchly loyalist Astartes of this whole devastating period in Imperial history. But why? Well, in the days leading up to his pivotal role, it's also helpful to understand the background of who Nathaniel Garrow was. For he was recruited before his Primarch had even been discovered, and unlike many Space Marines later, as such he knew loyalty directly to the Emperor. Garrow was one of the earliest members of the 14th Legion, when it had still been known not as the Death Guard but as the Dusk Raiders. At this time the Legion carried not the later well-known marble white and green trimmed armour, but instead had a dull grey and crimson shoulder plate. They were named for their tactics, using devastating raids that would commence as soon as the light had faded. Many who faced them would surrender rather than face the coming onslaught as the sun would set, and the 14th were one of the early legions recruited from Terra itself during the final days of the Unification Wars. These warriors were some of the strongest of their breed and served to cement the early Legiones Astartes and prevent any risk of fracturing toward the ultimate success of the Emperor's Unification War. More importantly though, and this remains to my mind critical to Garrow's role in the Inquisition and the Grey Knights, was that the Emperor did not subdue the warlord clans from which Garrow came as part of his unrelenting war across Earth during this time. In fact, quite unusually, the Emperor actually sought a peaceful resolution instead of crushing them under the weight of his Thunder Warriors. Garrow...
Wait, so he was a part of a warlord clan. And I was just thinking right now, like, what if he was one of those Thunder guys, like kind of how he said right now, but I feel like at this time, the Emperor was still using them because obviously they didn't have, like, Space Marines then still at that time. And obviously they were a little cracked out of their minds. Yeah, apparently they would just go too far as I remember. So that's why eventually Space Marines came into play later on. They were highly unstable from what I remember hearing.
Who came from a region known as Old Albia, previously European Albania, and at this time the region held some of the most powerful and well-experienced warriors on Earth, who even carried many battalions of proto-dreadnoughts. The warriors of Albia would not submit to the Emperor, and through many devastating battles they would remain defiant. Whilst knowing he could probably win through sheer attrition, the Emperor saw this as unnecessary for both sides, for while he sought the ultimate domination and unification of Terra, this still need not come at any cost. Instead, he would call for a ceasefire and would approach the ruling council of Albia, it is said clad in no armour but cloth of white and crimson. The Albia clan at this time, tired of ruling warlords and endless war, would listen to the Emperor as he laid out his inclusive plans to unite and take humanity to the stars, and more importantly a path beyond endless, meaningless bloodshed. To the great surprise of his generals and councillors, the Albia Council accepted the Emperor's plan and without any shots fired would become part of the Emperor's great vision. Even more importantly, the way he approached the situation would bring the powerful Albia warriors into the Emperor's ranks, not as being physically and mentally subdued through a war of attrition, but as those injected with passion and loyalty for the cause. This would make the Albia ranks some of the most zealous and loyal supporters to the Emperor, revering him above all others. More importantly, Albia would gift its most powerful sons to the Emperor, who would in turn become the first of a new breed, now known as the Space Marines. These early Space Marines would quickly gain reputations among their existing forebears as relentless, disciplined, and experts in survival and endurance. They would systematically destroy any target assigned to them and throw...
Real quick, I think... Lamentors? Right? Custodians in the back. God, I hope I'm right. I've been getting so much wrong lately.
Reputations among their existing forebears as relentless, disciplined, and experts in survival and endurance. They would systematically destroy any target assigned to them and throw waves of armoured super soldiers against their foes. As time passed, their originally grey and plain armour would begin to show ranks and embellishments that had been part of old Albia. Shoulder plates especially would be painted deep crimson, the colour of the blood of their enemies. While the ranks of the Dusk Raiders were known for being unrelenting and highly destructive, breaking enemies' discipline, throwing them into panic and leaving many veterans fleeing the field in terror as the waves of grey and crimson would smash against their defences, the early 14th Legion, following the Emperor's example, were also well known for respecting agreements and deals struck between themselves and opponents. Early surrenders, which became more and more common, would always be upheld by the Dusk Raiders, but as equally as they would hold to these agreements, those who would break or go outside the time of these terms would be shown an unrelenting and savage level of brutality against them. The Dusk Raiders would continue in their sole loyalty to the Emperor for as long as 80 years until the time came for them to be reunified with their designated Primarch. This would be far from the joyous event that many had hoped for, but indeed a much bleaker shadow that fell upon the Dusk Raiders. They would be dissolved and broken down, recreated by Mortarion as the Death Guard. Their prior honours and loyalties scarcely remained. For one thing, up until this time the Dusk Raiders had been nearly entirely Terran-born from old Albia, yet after their recreation as the Death Guard, their forces under Mortarion's leadership would originate from his homeworld of Barbarous, and any could see the divisions and fractures of loyalty that this was potentially going to cause. These divisions would finally break out into the open at the inception of the heresy, whereby Mortarion would judge at least 1/3 of his legion as loyalists to the Emperor, notably most of these being original Dusk Raiders. And here is when we would see some of the first horrific acts of treachery in the events of the Istvan III massacre. The governor and forces of the Istvan system had risen in rebellion to the Imperium during the Crusade, and as such many loyalist marines were deployed to subdue and rein in these rebel forces. The War Master Horus would lead the campaign to secure the region, and legions participating would be the Sons of Horus, the Emperor's Children, the World Eaters, and of course the Death Guard. Mortarion would deploy a large contingent to the planet of Istvan III, notably those he had deemed loyal to the Emperor. Horus would unleash a hellish bombardment of virus bombs to the planet, and any Astartes unable to find shelter would be exterminated, along with the civilians across the planet itself. This onslaught led to the estimations of as many as 8 billion deaths, and the remaining gases of the decaying and dissolved remains of organic matter across the planet were now filling the atmosphere. These would be ignited, causing a firestorm that raged across the entire planet, melting and bringing down many hive cities that remained, and Angron of the World Eaters in a thoughtless rage would deploy to the surface to then slaughter the remaining loyalists in a battle that would last for months. Whilst this was all going on though, Battle Captain Nathaniel Garrow of the aforementioned Dusk Raiders and subsequent Death Guard stood aboard his worn-out assigned frigate, the Eisenstein. In the confusion of the Istvan III massacre, Garrow was one of the first to see the truth of the ensuing heresy and immediately took flight to escape any retaliation from the heavily armed traitors surrounding the planet. The ensuing flight to escape the traitors was not without significant difficulty, and all of the loyal Death Guard Astartes who remained aboard the Eisenstein under the command of Garrow swore to deliver the critical information of this betrayal to Terra, no matter the cost or the challenges thrown against them. After an extremely difficult journey, eventually Garrow was able to make contact with and finally bring the truth to the loyalist Imperial Fists, delivering his message directly to the Primarch Rogel Dawn. Dawn, though, upon hearing this declaration from Garrow, reacted in a blinding rage and nearly executing Garrow on the spot for having voiced such unthinkable and unbelievable accusations to the hallowed champion of the Emperor, Horus Lupercal. Yet Dawn would be convinced, and upon finally realising the truth, knew his only course of action was to return to Terra and bring this critical matter to the Emperor himself. Garrow, though, as one of the most zealous and loyal believers of the Emperor, had sworn and believed to his core that it had been his quest and his responsibility to bring this to the Emperor, to voice it himself personally, and it was a crushing blow that he would not be allowed to do this, and instead, along with the remaining loyalists, be imprisoned on Luna, as they had now been subsequently deemed an unknown quantity. Now this demonstrates the absolute fracturing of trust.
Wait, well, I mean, he just said trust, but as far as imprisoning him, I don't understand the reasoning behind it. I mean, I know what he said, but I don't understand it. I mean, obviously, trust is going to be very iffy, especially when there's like a lot of betrayal going on.
Trust in the Imperial forces that has now begun in earnest, where before they could never have imagined such treachery to be possible, now no one could be trusted. For Rogel Dawn, Garrow and his retinue least of all, for having had direct contact with not only traitors and heretics, but also the unmentionable and unknown horrors of the warp during their journey. It would be left to the Emperor himself to determine if they were in fact loyal and trustworthy to the Imperium, or simply further pawns in the games of the chaos.
Okay, well, that pawn part is like, okay, so I get it that they could be distrustworthy, but I mean, just for being in contact, and it's like, I don't see a way why they would tell them or warn them about what's going on if they weren't loyal, right? But then again, it's so vast as far as like humanity, and then it'd be very difficult just to, I guess, see who is actually loyal and not. And obviously, they're saying right now that he's going to be judged to determine whether or not he is or not. I don't know. I mean, I guess at least this shows like the extreme precautions they'll take as far as ensuring that they have everyone who's loyal close by, and really trying to figure out who the enemy is, or if the enemy is actually the enemy.
Chaos gods. Garrow, though, was still not past his harrowing trials of this time, and he'd now be faced with a battle never seen before, where one of his marines who had been injured by Nurgle's corruption whilst on board their flight through the warp on the Eisenstein now would be possessed and reformed as a true abomination, a demon of Nurgle, or the Lord of the Flies. Garrow would be forced to fight this foul entity after it wrought devastation to the Lunar fortress and eventually defeat it outside on the surface of Luna itself, banishing it back into the Immaterium. Now, there is very much more to the story of Nathaniel Garrow at this time, but the key elements for us in this instance are that he was extremely zealous in his loyalty to the Emperor, and that he remained loyal to the Imperium, despite the majority of his Space Marine Legion being either slaughtered or turned traitor, and also that he was instrumental in preventing far worse devastation to the Imperium during the initial stages of the revelations that many of the Emperor's Astartes had indeed turned against him and were now already beginning to wage a devastating civil war. All of this is important because of where the story of the Grey Knights now turns. At this early
So it's very interesting to at least get like really good backstory as to what leads to this, and I guess that's where the extreme loyalty also, as far as the fact that they're kind of, I think they said that they were part of the Inquisition. I don't think they were directly beneath them, maybe on the same level, but they're have a closer direct contact with the Emperor. So as far as that loyalty goes, it's really gonna start to show, and especially seeing like why they also specifically focus on fighting demons. I mean, also because of their psyker abilities.
Juncture, the Horus Heresy was now openly underway. However, to put things in perspective, it's worth remembering that this civil war actually only lasted for a period of roughly 9 years. And before we begin to look at the Grey Knights in earnest, we also need to understand the founding and formation of the organisation that they are part of. This is, of course, the Imperial Inquisition, and this is where we return to Nathaniel Garrow. Now, Garrow and others, including the Sister of Silence and Oblivion Knight Amandera Kendall, would be approached by Malcador the Sigillite, who you'll remember is the First Lord of Terror and the Emperor's Regent whilst away from Terror itself. Malcador was a psyker with extreme powers, possibly second only to the Emperor himself, and had been instrumental in protecting humanity by taking position upon the Golden Throne whilst the Emperor battled the War Master Horus in the final hours of the Horus Heresy. Ultimately, Malcador would be destroyed by the sheer power of the throne and dissolved to dust, but he remains one of mankind's greatest heroes in the Imperium of Man. So at the early outbreak of the heresy, Malcador would approach these individuals and propose to them that he was considering creating a new organisation within the Imperium, one requiring above all else individuals who carried a strongly inquisitive nature. Amandera would have her face and skin scarred to bear the sigil of the Regent of Terror using a composition of liquid metallic scarring. This would also be applied to Nathaniel Garrow's power armour, having all of his Death Guard markings removed entirely. His armour was now a pure grey silver and carried only the markings of the Sigillite, a mark which for thousands of years would carry terrifying weight and power throughout the Imperium and to its enemies, an infamous designation of a stylized letter I with 3 horizontal lines sitting centrally within it. This was the future marking of the Imperial Inquisition. It was prior to all the events of Nathaniel Garrow that the Emperor himself foresaw the need to order Malcador to locate individuals who would form an organisation who those within would display unquestioned loyalty, a strength of mind and courage that was absolutely unbreakable. A tall order to be sure, and furthermore this organisation would answer to no one but the Emperor himself. Its sole objective would be to protect the purity of the Imperium and prevent its corruption by the witches, traitors, mutants and Xenos. Malcador's quest would lead him to search the galaxy for those who would become responsible for ensuring the safe future of humanity. The heresy had already demonstrated that the Astartes of the Emperor were far from incorruptible as the Emperor had once hoped them to be, and so the establishing of a body to oversee all and whose entry requirements were beyond extreme had become an absolute necessity. Garrow, having been marked now as one of the first, if not the very first members of the Inquisition, would be tasked by Malcador with locating 7 other Astartes whose loyalty was absolutely without question. Their legion being traitor or loyalist was irrelevant to Malcador, only their loyalty to the Emperor and to the Imperium in both a physical and a spiritual sense mattered. These individuals are the founding core of the Grey Knights. One of the first Astartes that Garrow would seek out was an ultramarine by the name of Tylos Rubio. A powerful psyker, but under a decree by the Emperor, Space Marines had been outlawed from using psychic powers. This oath to the Emperor, especially among the Ultramarines, was sacrosanct, and so when Garrow located Rubio fighting a fierce battle, he refused to leave his brother Ultramarines, as any Astartes would do. But Garrow, believing Rubio to be one of the Marines he knew suitable for his quest from Malcador, decided to remain and assist the Ultramarines in fighting their battle. However, the intense engagement they were fighting against the traitorous Word-Bearers quickly deteriorated, and Rubio, realizing they had few options remaining, decided their only chance of survival was to unleash a devastatingly powerful psychic attack, in direct violation of the Emperor's decree. Subsequently after...
Alright, so this is crazy. I didn't know that using psyker abilities or psychic abilities was actually banned or just seen as something you don't do. I mean, obviously I can understand because I believe it has some connection to the warp, if I remember correctly. And then I guess this is where it's also going to start to come in, is that the Grey Knights, maybe that they're the only ones that use those powers right now, or maybe they are just the ones who are able to produce significant amounts of power. Fuck my stutter. And is it possible that other chapters are still using these abilities if they do have them, or is it specifically just the Grey Knights? And every other chapter that does have them can use it, but it's more like a dumbed down version of it.
So the battle, despite having saved many of his brother Ultramarines, Rubio was now held in disgrace by them, and upon seeing their turned backs, he realised he had little choice other than to take an oath of moment to Garrow and dedicate himself totally to following the orders of the Sigillite. The next Marine to join the retinue would be a curious choice, and Astartes Captain Mesa Varan, previously of the World Eaters Legion, which had now turned traitor to the Imperium. Similarly to Garrow and many Astartes across the legions at this time, Varan had disconnected himself from his betraying brothers and swore vengeance upon them. Yet unlike the clear-headed strength of character seen in Tylos Rubio, Varan was like many others among the World Eaters, quick to anger and longing for blood and combat, so initially seeming a strange and even unfitting choice for this new order. Yet through a situation of deception and corruption involving a flotilla of refugee ships and multiple supposed loyalist marines from legions including the Emperor's Children and White Scars, Varan would demonstrate through a series of fierce close-quarter engagements that he not only held extreme loyalty to the Emperor, but that he could also control his internal rage and showed great restraint in abiding Garrow's wisdom. Later on Terra, while reporting back to Malkador, Tylos and Varan would enter upon Garrow wearing their now plain grey armour marked with the distinctive eye insignia of the Sigillite. Varan exclaimed that he wished to become part of this new brotherhood, and Garrow accepted, under the express conditions that Varan constrain his desire for fire and retribution. The time for these things would be later, and their immediate and more critical mission was to remain in the shadows, to fulfill their mission for the Imperial Regent, and the days for vengeance and physical fury would come soon enough. Now, not all of the original founding members sought by Garrow and Malkador were known, but the final known Astartes recruited was none other than Garvior Loken. Now, Loken is actually a fairly established figure in this early breakout period of heresy, as he once was a member of the now infamous Mournival within the Legion of the Sons of Horus, formerly the Lunar Wolves. Now, this was the closest advisory circle of officers who would counsel their Primarch and now War Master Horus. This group all held a strong bond beyond that of usual Astartes brothers as an extension of the informal warrior lodge that they had become familiar with after the conquest of Davin. Regardless of its origins though, the Mournival was tasked with advising Horus in many roles including tactics, diplomacy, even ethical choices. Horus was a master of diplomacy and compromise before his corruption by chaos, and the involvement of the Mournival was partly a charade and partly genuinely useful. It certainly enabled Horus to retain and legitimize his decisions by portraying the appearance of making balanced and even-handed choices, when in actuality he would often use others as a smokescreen to merely give additional weight to decisions he had already made in advance in his own mind. But Garvior Loken, after the horrors of the Istvan massacre, finds himself there abandoned by his brothers. As with the other loyalists, he would be subjected to the harrowingly traumatic virus bombing of the planet, which would horrifically slaughter billions, Astartes and civilian alike. However, not all Astartes on the planet were biologically dissolved out of existence. Many survived.
Hold on, I just want to make clear, and I know I might be wrong about this, but is this the same Lorcan that is in the Harris Horsey book? Because if it is, I'd heard that it was his fault that some of that stuff happened. It was my understanding that he was actually with Horus and just on his side, and he became a traitor. But then I just kept on thinking, like, the way he's being portrayed in the story, he seems like he's someone that just started to question kind of what was going on, but was ultimately still loyal to the Emperor. But the fact that they're saying that he was the last one to join, so he's a Grey Knight. Still is, or was. I don't know if he's dead or not. I would have to get farther in the story, but I really want to know, is this the same Lorcan? If so, please comment that down below. I'm going to be researching it as well right after this video because I really want to make sure. That's just, I don't know, but we'll keep going. We got a few minutes left before we pause this first video.
Survived in bunkers, and as fate would have it, one of those survivors was Garvior Loken. Now completely mentally broken by the severity of his brother's betrayal and simultaneously the appalling atrocities he had witnessed, compounded by now his isolation on Istvan III, Loken was now devoid of his own identity, his mind no doubt suffering some kind of automatic defense system that's known to occur when a person suffers an especially traumatic event. Sometimes a person's mind will essentially erase its own memories as a means of psychological self-defense. Loken, now believing himself to be a guardian of the underworld, given the sheer volume of horror and death all around him, titled himself Cerberus, believing he was now the only remaining loyalist marine in the galaxy, and the one thing he knew for certain was his duty and his loyalty to the Emperor and the Imperium, believing that as death had rejected him, he would do his duty and guard for all time the biologically annihilated ruins of Istvan III. But that was until Malkador the Sigillite's chosen warriors would arrive, of course. Nathaniel Garrow had returned with the singular task of attempting to locate Loken, who they believed to be alive somewhere still on the planet, and more importantly believed him to be a strong candidate for the Sigillite's quest, if he was still alive, that is. Garrow, Rubio and Varren would discover, after combat with Cerberus and disturbed creatures who deceptively initially appeared human but were in fact Nurgle demon hosts, that the one they sought was in fact the deranged and psychotic Cerberus. After a final battle between Garrow and the self-titled Cerberus, Garrow would eventually be able to reach through the fog of trauma that clouded Loken's mind and reach the few remaining shreds of purity and honour that was the Astartes, previously known as Garviel Loken. But now he was about as far from being a glorious superhuman Astartes, a pinnacle of human development. He was not far from being described as more like a wretched, mentally barren animal. But as with all encounters during this time, the sense of skepticism and suspicion was powerful. Was Loken truly what they were hoping he would be, or was he even perhaps something far worse, more sinister, a deceitful agent left by Horus to spring some shrewd trap upon those loyal to the Imperium? The retinue would return to the Somnus Citadel on Luna, where what would follow was the first of many interrogations that could be perhaps quite appropriately classified as an inquisition. Loken would be pushed to the very knife edge of death multiple times as he's mentally and physically tested beyond the limits of even an Astartes. And even then there were those who did not believe his loyalty was not just a facade and that he harboured some latent evils to unleash at an appropriate time and place. The trials of Garviel Loken cut to the core of the problem with the heresy and traitors to the Imperium, the issue being that even having sustained horrific interrogations and survived to see the other side, it could still not be said with any certainty that Loken was indeed truly loyal. It was different for the others like Garrow and Rubio and Varren, who had through their actions displayed their loyalty, yet even then, to be pedantic, where do you draw that line in the sand? Horus himself had shown that any number of loyal and heroic acts didn't amount to any absolute sense of immovable loyalty to the Emperor. All of this was pushing towards the sense that in order to ascertain the best possible chance of purity and loyalty, you had to be extreme in the extreme. In the end, it all comes down to a simple matter of instinctual trust, and for many members of the Imperium during the time, trust was a commodity that would be increasingly difficult to come by. With Loken being the last of the Astartes warriors Garrow had set to recruit, he had ultimately completed his quest for the Sigillite. Malkador would bring the 12 robed figures who now represented the finest and most stalwart members of the Imperium before the Emperor himself. 8 of these would be Astartes, and another 4 were human lords of the Imperium. Some of the Astartes came from the now traitor legions, and others from remaining loyalist legions. These facts would ultimately be irrelevant, as the only key factor to their being in this place at this time was their total devout loyalty to the Emperor and the Imperium of Man. The Emperor was pleased, and Malkador could mark up another success for himself in service as the Emperor's regent.
Alright, let's go ahead and talk about that for a minute. Now, I'm not sure how long this video is going to be, so that's why I was trying to get everything out during the actual video. I feel like I did. The one part I just want to reiterate is the part about Loken. Loken, right? Not Lorcan. Loken, yeah. As far as the book, and actually starting to see that translation. I mean, obviously, I'm pretty sure now this is the same person. And he was the first one that I can think of right now, or that people have been mentioning when I talked about in another video about have Space Marines gone to PTSD systems, and they were mentioning Loken, and I was like, why does that name sound familiar? That sounds like the name from the book. So I started putting two and two together, and just right now when they said that he was so traumatized being abandoned by his brothers, everybody, and that he was kind of, it seemed like he was kind of going crazy in a sense. And then he even called himself Cerberus. And then, so it seems like he fought them, Garrow, and then after that happened, they were very curious to see whether or not he was still going to be the person who he is, or if he was just completely changed mentally. Then it seemed like he was getting tortured by the Inquisition, but he was eventually, from what I saw, able to join. I wonder if that's going to happen in the book. Obviously, I don't know. I had to listen to more of it. But I really like the fact that he ended up, at least after having that experience, where loyalty is supposed to be everything, and then you just see everyone betraying that back and forth and everywhere, that he's still able to join the Grey Knights. And obviously, also with that Ultramarine, I don't remember his name, Rubio. When he ended up using sacred powers, he just got shunned by everybody that was there. And then, I mean, I understand why, because of the act, but it's like he just saved them right now. And since he was an Ultramarine, he even ended up pledging, I think they said the oath, to Nathaniel Garro. I think I said that right. And then, essentially joining the Grey Knights, or they keep seeing Sigil as well. I don't know if that's supposed to be considered the same thing, but so there is some special instances of people going from one chapter to another chapter. But then I've heard that the Grey Knights are a special kind of Space Marine. I don't even know if they would be technically classified as one. Same thing with the Custodies. I keep picturing them as Space Knights, but some say that they're just a special instance. And then also with the Grey Knights and Inquisition, and for that, they're more connected to the Emperor more directly than your regular Space Marine chapter. Although not every single one of them, or none of them really, are considered regular. But that's going to go ahead and do it for this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, really does help me a lot. Hit that dislike button if you didn't like it. Helps me improve the channel. If you're curious to see what's coming out next, check the list down below. Top to bottom is going to be how I view them. But until then, I'll see you all in the next video. Bye.